Hey guys, welcome to another Ruby session in programming by practicing. Today we're going to learn about arrays and how to create arrays. So what's an array? Let me start that by defining an example. Let's say we have a variable called Kardashian. So you can assign one value to it, let's say Kim. Now if you want to print it, you use Ruby's put syntax and give the variable name, and now what it's going to do is now let's try running the Ruby script. Ruby, I've named my file as array.rb, so array.rb, and it's going to print one value, Kim. Now let's say you want to define successful Kardashian, and you put it as Chloe. So if you want to print both the sisters' name, now you see that you have to put comma and then add the second variable name here. So if you run your Ruby script again, it will print both values. So this is getting a bit tedious. If you want to define all the 5 famous people in the Kardashian family, you have to declare 5 different variables. That's in order to reduce this burden, we have a construct called arrays. In this, what you just do is you use square brackets and you enclose the value within the square bracket, and now if you try to print it, failed because we didn't remove successful Kardashian, of course. Now if you just print it again, you can see it just printed the first value, Kim. If you want to add a new sibling, all you have to do is put a comma, give a second sibling's name, and there you go. Now we added both the sisters to a single variable, and we are using just one variable name everywhere in the put command or wherever you want to do operations. You want to add one more sibling to it, just give it a third value, and if you try to print the Kardashian sisters, boom, all 3 sisters are printed. So if you want to define array, I guess you can say something like a continuous set of elements of one type or multiple types, which you can assign to a single variable, and the single variable can be used everywhere else. It sort of increases your efficiency if you use arrays, and it sort of groups all your data together also. Now let's talk about how to create an array. So you just saw one method of how to create an array. Simply all you have to do is give a square bracket and it creates an array in Ruby. Now if you try to print it, it gives a blank as default value. You can also use a function provided by Ruby called array.new. This also does basically the same thing. As you can see, when I tried to run the script, it printed an empty array. Now what's the difference between using a square bracket and array.new? Well, you have a lot of utility methods in array.new for initializing it with default values, for declaring n number of items in an array. Example, let's say there are 3 sisters, so you want an array with 3 elements. Just use the function and give a value 3. So now if you try to print it, it just created a 3 element array and assigned default value as nil. Now what if you want to give a default value which is not nil but say unnamed? You give a second parameter. So the first parameter declares how many elements you want to be created in an array. The second declares what's the default value you want to give. Now if you try to print it, you would see that instead of the nil, it's actually printing 3 elements but with the default value unnamed. So this is a powerful little function which we have, because if you programmed in some other language such as Java, you know that you have to create the first array and then you have to use a for loop through that first array and then create each of the individual inner arrays. if you are creating, let's say, a multi-dimensional array. But in Ruby, all you have to do is give the same array.new inside with, let's say, 2 elements, and this will create a multi-dimensional array with 3 individual elements, each of which has 2 other elements inside. So you can see this small little function in Ruby is pretty awesome and pretty powerful. Now let's say another restriction in some of the other languages is that if you have an array and you give it a string, you can only give string as the remaining elements also. So for example, if Kim is a string, and then Chloe has to be a string, and then Courtney also has to be a string. But in Ruby, this is not the case. You can even give numbers or decimals within the same array. Type doesn't matter. So let's say you want to print it out. As you can see, it doesn't care whether it has strings as the Kardashian sister names, or it has a number, or it has a decimal. You can even give a boolean value, and that would also be printed. See, if it was a string, you have to give quotes, but I'm giving a boolean true. So you can easily create arrays like this. Another function which we have is block array creation. In this, you give the same array.new, 3 elements, but instead of giving let's say a default value using comma, what you do is you use a block and give a default value. So this is also going to print the same 3 element array with the default value as the default. The use of this is, let me show you a small little trick. So I just use the same syntax, 3 unnamed. So what this is going to do, it's going to create an array with 3 elements. Each of the element within that array is another inner array with 3 different elements. So if you print it, you can see it has 9 different elements separated by commas. So this is the first element, which is an array with 3 elements. Second element, another array with 3 elements. And third element, which is a third array with 3 elements. Now we'll learn about this more in another class, but basically you access an array using square brackets and providing an index number. So in programming language, indexes start from 0. So this is index 0, index 1 and index 2. Index 0 represents the first element. Okay, just know that. Now if I put one more 0, that's actually trying to access the 0th element within the 0th element. So here the 0th element is this first array, and the 0th element within that is this small little unnamed. So what I want to do is I want to assign it Kim. So what should happen? Ideally it should just change this value to Kim, right? Well, let's try printing that. Oh, what happened? It actually changed the first 0th element within the first array, 0th element within the 0th array, first array and the second array. What happened? That's because when you use this function, Ruby actually creates one array with 3 elements and default value unnamed, and basically reuses the same object for all these 3 elements. So it's just copy pasting the same element everywhere. So if you change the first element, by default it changes the second and the third elements. Now how can you avoid that? Well, that's where block array creation comes. So what it does is it just removes the bracket and uses curly brackets. So what this does is it again creates a 3 element array. Each of the inner element is another 3 element array with a default value unnamed. However, Here Ruby uses completely different objects for all the three inner arrays. Let's print that. What happened? Oh, we have an extra bracket. Let's just try removing that and printing it again. Aha! Now Kim has been assigned only to the first inner array. The second and third inner arrays are left unchanged. So this is another useful utility which you can use for creating where you have different constructs such as arrays or hashes representing the inner elements.
That's it for today. See you guys in the next video.